Thank you so much for joining Paramita. Just Futures Law does such important work fighting the use of surveillance tech to fuel mass incarceration and deportation, including your groundbreaking investigation on how the federal government is deploying big tech contractors to build a for-profit surveillance state. So on that note, could you break that down for us a bit more? Can you tell us more about how the digital watchtower that our government is trying to build and what's at stake for all of us?
Yeah, I've been thinking about this question as to whether we have and thanks for having me, by the way. I'm really excited to see all the amazing work that's being done, especially on the labor organizing side. I have been thinking about this question as to whether we're dealing with a digital watchtower. Are we? I mean, to some degree, like a digital watchtower kind of insufficiently captures what's at stake. I think surveillance has been masked as this benign force that gives out the impression that the more sophisticated it gets, the better it becomes, right? Maybe through that we'll have gentler deportations, kinder jump outs, by ICE agents, better arrests, better prisons. But I think, for JFL and for the partners that we work with, our research, our litigation has shown exactly the opposite. From our research, and we do all our research with grassroots groups because we do believe that organizing really is the brains and the heart of our movements. And so whatever research and litigation we do that in partnership with grassroots. And what we have found through those partnerships is that the systems that DHS has built with police are overflowing with biometrics, social media scanning, data sharing, sharing with local police, with the Fusion Center, right? You can actually chart a through line from your DMV, actually from Equifax, right? Your credit agency to the DMV to ICE. And if you talk to the NSA today, they're going to tell you, and they have told us that this is the time for the biggest data war of this century, that they are in a war for data, and that the idea is to get as much data as they can to win whatever war we're in right now. So immigration for us, has always been something very complicated, right? I think it's been something where it is actually a doorway to authoritarianism for a couple of reasons. One, because DHS is an early adopter of surveillance technologies. And number two, it's because it's one of the largest it is the largest paramilitary force in the United States. And it made sense for us as JFL to begin our research there because honestly, they've been able to build surveillance at scale. They've been able to work on the 46 million foreign-born people in the United States. When you can think about kind of honing in on a population where the rights are a little bit of a question mark, immigrants are where it's at. And so it's very important to kind of start there and to really do the research there. And from there, we learn what goals they had in mind. But really, what's at stake? Outside of kind of the collection of all this data, our personal sensitive data, is the fact that political persecution is now up in front and center, the vivisection, right, of our civil rights. Social media surveillance wasn't only used to attack foreign students. I think people thought that there was some safety in that. Now we know they're going after colleges and universities, right? Talking about Gaza brought huge amounts of political retaliation, not only against scholars, but against all types of people who are engaged in civic action. ICE officers deploy facial recognition technology, whether it's Clearview AI or Mobile Fortify. They are taking pictures and they are coming up to people who are filming them and saying, "Are you Antifa?" Right? I think, they're drones, CBP drones, right? That are flying around in front of people's homes in Chicago. I think it's not the fact that all of our data is at risk of exploitation. That is true. That is happening. That is now. And most of it absolutely is being taken without a warrant, without our consent, without our knowledge in most cases. But what I'm also really concerned about is the very weak regulatory environment that we have, the fact that we don't have strong consumer protection laws, very poor, unfair, deceptive practice protection laws. Our federal and local governments are embracing surveillance technologies without thinking about whether it even works, whether it's meeting the purposes for which they thought it was going to be used for. And they definitely are not asking the people that it's going to be used on. So I think we're waiting for that really true public conversation we need around technology and data governance, which is, I think, what we uncovered, was one of the biggest issues of our time.
Thanks so much for sharing that, for sure. And then, a lot of what you described is this really close marriage between the federal government and Silicon Valley, where the government, wants to spend a lot of money on this technology, and Silicon Valley has its own all-consuming interest in maximizing profit. So, what do you think that means in terms of implications for how we organize and resist this kind of stuff?
Yeah, I mean, I'm like, this might date me, but I think of this Woody Guthrie thing that says fascism comes along whenever the rich people get the generals to do what they want, right? And so the tech oligarchy, and I know this has already been said, has already been standing with Trump. And the weapons that are being deployed against immigrants, against workers, against border communities, against civil society is already happening. I think like where it came together for me was in the statement for ICE, where it said, the ICE director, Todd Lyons, said his goal for DHS under the Trump administration was that he wanted a deportation system to run like Amazon Prime, but with human beings. And I think that kind of captures, how they see this relationship with technology. I think there's no better example of this than Doge, right? Doge has raided federal agencies for personal and sensitive data. They have gutted them at the same time they're sharing that data. And we do not know who they're sharing that data with. And they've commenced essentially a hostile takeover over those government data systems. But I think that is going to lead into so many other things that DHS can do now that it is working hand in hand with Doge, which I know has left the headlines, but has left, a bunch of policy and infrastructure behind. We expect to see Palantir, benefiting from these programs. And Musk has been very much in favor of Immigration OS and overhaul of a new surveillance platform. We expect to see more spyware and phone hacking technology from companies like Cellebrite and Paragon Solutions. Clearview, which we have a lawsuit against, for scraping facial scans, off social media technology. They will also be another contractor under DHS. But I think, as much as people think that surveillance is benign, I always think about SmartLink, which was an app that was used by DHS to basically get people on an app to monitor where they are. It's called electronic monitoring. We call it digital caging. And they touted it as this alternative to a cage. And what we did find out is that really they were just building prisons all along while they were building this app, right? And so now, under this administration, because SmartLink started under the Biden administration, we now have Alligator Alcatraz and so many other kind of prisons that are really largely being set up all over the South. Look, we're really in this challenging moment, and I think it's going to stay that way. These are big dollars. These are very big corporations. And I know from us, we do not want to hide the ball that there's well-justified fear that these companies can sue all of us out of existence. Um, and they've had years to kind of like make their, inroads into local government and us, but we still have so many options. We have the cities, we have our states, we have local policy, we have the courts. I think now what we're trying to do with the data, the information, the wedges that we're trying to build is like, how can we lay some of that groundwork for victories?